Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Town of Ajax's virtual public meeting for the Stormwater Funding Feasibility Study. Thank you for taking the time to participate. Tonight is an opportunity to provide you with an introduction and overview of the project and answer your questions. My name is Catherine Ross, and I am an engagement and communication specialist with ACOM, and I will be your host this evening. Next slide, please. I'd like to run through a few housekeeping items before we go through the agenda. So we are using Zoom's webinar platform tonight, and as you may have seen on the main screen, all of the attendees are muted. We will be keeping the video off throughout most of the meeting to avoid any bandwidth issues. That means that we'll invite your participation through the Q&A box. You can access this feature through the menu bar by hovering your mouse over the screen. And if you're using a smartphone or tablet, you can tap the screen and that toolbar should pop up. No other attendees will be able to see questions that you submit. And there's also an option to submit questions anonymously to the project team. We know that technological problems can and do happen sometimes, so we do appreciate your patience with us. And if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please feel free to use the Q&A box to ask for help. I will be monitoring this throughout the meeting, and I'll do my best to help. If you are listening into the meeting only through the phone option, we will be sending a copy of the presentation after the meeting, along with contact information for the project team. And you can reach out by phone or email after the presentation to ask your questions. This webinar is also being recorded, and all of the Q&A will remain anonymous to avoid any privacy concerns. Next slide, please. Thanks. So the agenda. During the first part of this evening, we will hear from our project team through a presentation. And following the presentation, we'll address questions from those of you at home. Please feel free to ask your questions throughout the meeting, but we'll try to hold off responding to them until after the presentation. And we're aiming to end the meeting by 6:00 p.m. So in a moment, I'll hand it over to Stephen Ruddy, the project manager from the Town of Ajax, to provide a welcome and introduction. And from there, the rest of the project team will say a quick hello before we get started. I'll turn it over to Stephen now.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. Well, maybe not coming. Maybe you're just sitting at home or the office enjoying the presentation. I'm Stephen Ruddy. I'm project manager at the Town of Ajax. I work in the engineering section of the Planning and Development Services Department.
Thanks, Stephen. And Pippi, do you want to say a quick hello?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry, I can't see the control very well. My name is Pippi Warburton, and I am the project manager from ACOM for this project. And I've worked on quite a number of funding studies across Ontario with other municipalities. And I'm happy to be working on this one. They're all unique. So it's been great learning about Ajax through this study. And I look forward to working with the team and hearing your questions today.
Thank you, Pippi. And how about Mike?
Sure, I'll go next. Hello, residents and business owners in the Town of Ajax. My name is Mike Gregory. I'm speaking to you live from Guelph, Ontario, just down the road. So I've been working with the AECOM team as a consultant since 2005. My whole career has been in stormwater management, now into past 3 decades now of stormwater management. And so I'm very excited to talk to you about some of the aspects of this study.
Thanks, Mike. And we've got Nancy.
Hello, Nancy Hill here. I'm with AECOM, and I've worked with this team for many years, working on stormwater management projects across Canada, and really excited to hear everyone's feedback. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. And then we've got Don and Anna.
Hello, my name is Don Stone, and I've been involved in stormwater utility work since 1994. And I too am looking forward to working with the town. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Waz, and I'm providing GIS support on this project, and I look forward to helping out on this project.
Thanks, everyone. And Stephen, I'll pass it back off to you.
Thanks, Catherine. So just to get started, what exactly is stormwater management and why is it important? Stormwater is the runoff generated from rain and from snowmelt. Urban stormwater runoff contains sediment and pollution, which we try to remove prior to its release to the natural environment, referring to the creeks, wetlands, and in Ajax to the Lake Ontario waterfront. It's important to treat stormwater runoff because this pollution it carries can significantly harm natural areas. It is also important to manage the volume of stormwater runoff to mitigate flood risk. You can see this with the many stormwater management ponds within the town. The Town of Ajax Stormwater Funding Feasibility Study was approved by Council as part of the 2020 capital budget, and it has the objective of determining life cycle costing for the Town of Ajax's stormwater infrastructure and provide recommendations for an effective and sustainable funding source to meet the ongoing maintenance requirements of the stormwater management system. Some of the items we'll look at today are the existing service levels. Oh, can you go back to 5, please? Thanks. So we're going to look at the existing service levels, which we've identified, as well as current and future expenditures related to life cycle maintenance and rehabilitation. And we've also identified funding sources that we're already leveraging. And we've also explored options to meet the town's future demands. Going on. So as I stated, this project is really looking inward at the way the town's stormwater management system is funded, which is through property taxes. We have leveraged grants from the federal and provincial governments previously, but those are not always available and can be rather hit or miss whether or not they're kind of applicable to what we need at the time. As part of the recent regulation update highlighted here, the OREG 588, the asset management planning for municipal infrastructure, the town's required to develop a sustainable funding platform for all of its infrastructure. First, its core infrastructure, which stormwater is a part of, and then ultimately all infrastructure by 2024. The town's no stranger to flood events and erosion hazards, which we've had to mitigate, and we know we'll continue to invest in things like water quality and wetland restoration. So it's appropriate that we continue looking for a sustainable funding stream to do just that. Thanks, Catherine.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the scope of work of this project. So this project is really to study and review and make a recommendation of what's the best funding option for the town of Ajax to have a sustainable funding source for their stormwater management. So the first thing we need to do is determine an appropriate and affordable level of service for the existing and the future stormwater management program. So finding out how much money you're currently spending on the stormwater program and where the gap is, how much money you should be spending. So we also will benchmark that to other municipalities across the province and across Canada to see how much they're spending on stormwater program and see if it seems reasonable. We're going to identify and evaluate stormwater funding options and alternatives. We're going to solicit feedback from you fine folks and the community, stakeholders, residences to find out what's important to you with respect to stormwater and how you feel about the different options, which ones make more sense for Ajax. And then we're going to recommend a preferred option and determine the impacts compared to the current funding approach. And then eventually we're going to be presenting those projects and study recommendations to council, probably in early 2020. So what is stormwater and stormwater runoff? So Stephen has talked about that a little bit, and I think most people probably know about stormwater, because if you've ever seen flooding in the streets, or that's usually when something bad happens, is when most people think about stormwater. So it's water that comes from rain or from melted snow, so it's not groundwater. We sometimes refer to it as surface water, and it's the water that hits the ground and then eventually runs off to our streams and lakes and rivers. One thing that I think that a lot of people don't realize is, like, when you get electricity from the socket in your wall, some people don't realize when water goes down a catch basin, where does it go? I think some people consider that it's going to get treated before it actually goes out to the natural environment. Well, most of the time it doesn't. Sometimes there's some treatment along the way, but often that stormwater goes straight to our natural habitat. So not only do we need to manage stormwater for flooding and the quantity of stormwater, we also need to take care to manage the quality of stormwater and make sure that we're protecting our natural environments. So when we look at stormwater in an urban environment, we really look at impervious surfaces. Impervious means hard surfaces like pavements, rooftops, parking lots. Stormwater runs off those impervious areas a lot faster and flashier than it does from pervious areas. You can just imagine that a forest or a rain garden will soak up the water before it starts running off, but from a paved area, it's going to run off very quickly. So we tend to consider the amount of stormwater a property produces is directly proportional to how much impervious surface they have. So stormwater runoff is often referred to as drainage too. So some of those terms are interconnected. And I am talking about this slide too. So this is a good slide. Sometimes these slides are really important to look at because all municipalities have issues with stormwater. You know, nature is powerful and there's always going to be stormwater issues. But if you leave them without maintenance, over time, they can be much more expensive to deal with than actually having proper maintenance along the way. So this is a good example of some shoreline erosion that it needs fixing now and will be quite costly and hopefully can get done soon. So we manage stormwater to control from flooding and reduce pollution. Like I was saying, it involves controlling the quantity and the quality of the stormwater runoff as it's going to head to our natural environment. And stormwater management really aims to protect property and personal safety as well, and to protect infrastructure from damage and further erosion. And it's always important to keep in mind, like all assets, it's the town's responsibility to manage their assets properly with good operations and maintenance along the way, so you don't end up with much more costly bills later on, just handing them down to generations. So that's a bit about why we're doing this project, to make sure that there's sufficient funds to manage your assets well. So this looks like this is, Duffins Creek and Lake Ontario. So I guess this is the shoreline of Lake Ontario, just down by, I guess that's close to the ACOM office, I think. Okay, so next we're going back to Steve, I think.
Thanks, Pippi. So these pictures are from this year. This was a large rain event that we had in January, and this is a stormwater management pond that is not quite assumed by the town yet. It was slated to be cleaned out and have the outlet rehabilitated before ownership and responsibility of maintenance is passed to the town. But prior to that happening, this large storm event came, the outlet of the pond was blocked, so the pond filled up and overtopped its southern bank and resulted in Roslyn Road being closed until the water subsided. There was that much. So this is just an example of how a neglect of proper maintenance on a facility can result in big problems later on down the road. Literally down the road in this case. So here's a couple more examples that have happened very recently in the town. The first picture on the left is from that same storm event, a little further downstream. This is near the Caldecott Court, right across, and this is looking at Carruthers Creek. So the creek flooded. It's normally in a narrow channel underneath that pedestrian bridge. And as you can see, the water has flooded across the extent of the valley floor and is about halfway up that railing on the pedestrian bridge. This middle picture is looking at the plunge pool of a storm sewer outfall, which is not quite in the shot there. And you can see that water is not clean water. This comes from about 80 hectares of untreated drainage that drains directly to the waterfront. So we have challenges in existing infrastructure, like you can see there. And the picture on the right is anybody who's an Ajax resident in the south end is probably familiar with the algae that we get throughout the summer, especially after a storm event, where there's a lot of wave action, knocking all the algae around, throwing it on shore, and it ultimately dying and decaying and becoming a real nuisance to the enjoyment of the otherwise quite nice Ajax waterfront. So those are just a couple of the challenges that we're facing and that we're dealing with on a everyday basis here in the town. Thank you.
Thanks. And Nancy, I think you're up next.
Right. Okay. So we've so far in the presentation, we've identified what some of the problems are, but ultimately we want to identify solutions. So there are a lot of cases. The town of Ajax has done studies and have identified solutions to some of the problems that have been identified. But of course, these do take finances. It takes money to these projects. It takes staffing to do these projects. And so that's one of the objectives of this study, is to say, okay, how much money is needed and where should the money come from? So next slide. So the first thing we did was just did a quick inventory of the assets that the town of Ajax looks after. So there are a lot of different types of assets. There's the sort of hard, call them the gray infrastructure, the engineered infrastructure. So you've got drains and you have pipes. Some of them purely just convey water from A to B out towards Lake Ontario, and other assets are there to treat stormwater. So on the lower right there's an oil grit separator, which helps take out some of the oil and the sand that's collected in the stormwater runoff. And then there's also the natural assets. So water courses, streams, creeks, wetlands, partly they convey stormwater, but they also, in certain cases, will help treat stormwater. The town has a lot of ponds, and that will help collect sediment, remove it from the stormwater before it gets discharged into creeks and ponds. Okay, next slide. So after we identified the inventory, we identified what is the town of Ajax currently spending on its stormwater program. So recently, on average, it's spending $1.6 million per year. About half of that is on maintenance. And so those are things, it's inspecting the system, it's removing blockages and trash, it's sweeping the streets to get rid of contaminants, and it's doing some studies to look at what needs to be done. The next, the other half is what we call capital expenses. So those are projects. So an old sewer that's deteriorated, it's replacing that. The ponds that are built to help remove sediment out of the stormwater system, well, they start to fill up with sediment. So you've got to go in there and dig the sediment out of it. Things like that, the restoring of natural assets, Carruthers Marsh and Paradise Park wetland. So those are some examples of some of the more recent projects that the town has undertaken. Okay. So we know what the town is currently spending, and we said, well, how is it funding that 1.6 million? So about half of that funding is coming from property taxes. And then, so that's what everyone pays as part of their, it's based on their assessed value and when they pay their property taxes each year. And the other half is coming from other sources. So reserves that the town has collected, grants that they've received from the provincial, federal, typically levels of government, third parties. So sometimes it might come from a developer. So currently, the average, we've determined that the average home contributes about $18 per year to stormwater through taxes. So that 47%, that's where, everyone contributes to it, non-residential, commercial, industrial, but the average home would contribute $18 per year to stormwater through the property taxes. Now, if the town did not receive any grants, the reserves too, those run out after a while. So if this whole pie, if that whole $1.6 million had to be funded through property taxes, then the average home would need to contribute $38 per year. So, so if the town did not get grants, the reserves ran out, and it needed to continue to fund that 1.6 million, then it would need, and it continued to do so through property taxes, that represents a 1.2% tax increase, just to maintain the existing program. Okay, next slide. So, the one thing about the existing program is that it allows the town to do some inspection of some assets. It allows the town to address some of the ponds, the worst ponds, some of the sewers that are at the end of their life. And usually this is done when grant funding comes available. They're able to address these problems. As previously mentioned, there are some ponds out there that help treat stormwater, but the entire system is not does not have stormwater treatment. So there's still a fair bit that needs to go out to the environment. So if the town wanted to run a full program, so it was regularly inspecting all of its assets, all of the stormwater was being treated, and it was able to replace sewers and clean out ponds when needed, not just when funding became available, then we estimated that the town would need to spend about $9 million a year on its stormwater program. So that's quite a big jump. And that represents, so if that just all came from property taxes, that would result in an increase, a 10% increase in property taxes just to fund stormwater. So that's quite significant and often not palatable. Next slide. So it's really tough for municipal governments. They have limited forms of revenue. It's not like the provincial federal government where you have income tax and sales tax and things like that. Municipal governments are limited in the ways they can generate revenue. And certainly when property tax is quite, increases in property tax can be quite controversial and are usually tried to kept to a minimum. So part of this project is to say, well, how should we be funding stormwater? What is the best way to fund stormwater to sustainable levels? Next slide. So we also did a little bit of benchmarking to see how Ajax compares with other municipalities. So we've done studies with other Ontario municipalities and we took the ones where they're similar size to Ajax in terms of population and size of system. So currently Ajax spends $1.6 million, and you can see the 4 other towns that were closest in size is we spend on average $5.1 to $12.9 million per year. So that's quite a difference. Even if Ajax became fully funded at the estimated $9 million per year, it would still be kind of middle of the road with the other Ontario municipalities. So I think it's fair to say that Ajax is maybe not spending as much as they maybe should when compared with other like municipalities in Ontario. The other thing, oh, sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say the other thing, it also notes what the average household, so your average single family dwelling pays towards stormwater for these municipalities. And as you can see, it's quite a range, but generally more than what the average home is paying in Ajax. Okay, over to Mike, I believe.
All right, thanks, Nancy. Okay, so now that Nancy's described how much money we're talking about, let me talk about where the money comes from. And so what you see on your screen are the just general categories for funding stormwater management for municipalities. particularly in Ontario. And so the first thing that you should be familiar with are the tax levies. These are based on property tax. And so our friends at MPAC, Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, they set the assessed value of your home, and the town sets the tax rate. So when you multiply those two together, that comes up with how much money is paid for property tax for each property in the town of Ajax. And so, oh, and so by the way, there's the town also, not only are the property taxes used for town services, but the town also collects education tax on behalf of the province. We're not talking about that. We're only talking about what we call the general fund, the general municipal tax fund. Now, there are some municipalities in Ontario that have a dedicated levy, and what that means is that you can, you've earmarked specific tax rates for specific city services. Ajax doesn't do that right now, but there are other communities in Ontario that do. Okay, so the next broad category then would be special charges, and these are mostly to capture new development or redevelopment, usually in very specific neighborhoods. And the formula is often based on gross area of the development for local improvements, development charges, etc. But it could also be tax-based. But again, these are special districts or special areas that have a special charge for very specific purposes. What we're going to talk about mostly is the third bullet you see there, and that's user fees. And the formula, as this slide says, can vary quite a bit, usually based on, if we're talking about electricity or water, it's based on demand or usage. But we're talking about stormwater, so a stormwater user fee would not be based on demand or usage, but it's based on disposal or contribution. So we're actually, each property contributes stormwater and then disposes of it into the town's collection system. So that's what we're talking about. Then there's other sources, grants, fees, partnerships, etc., that Stephen talked about earlier. Next slide. Okay, so I doubt that anyone on the call can remember a time when public utilities were paid for, all of the public utilities were paid for through property tax. But then in the 40s and 50s, that shifted, where the cost of treatment for drinking water, potable water, increased so much, and we could put meters in homes that we charge people based on how much water they use. Take it off of the tax base and put it onto a user fee or an enterprise fund, we call it. So specific fees and charges for very specific services. So that was drinking water, then along came wastewater and solid waste, and now stormwater is just one in a progression of these utilities that have come off of the tax base and moved on to a specific user fee. Next slide. Okay, so what's the basis of charging someone for stormwater? You can't just put a meter on everyone's property and charge that way. So we use a surrogate indicator. And that indicator, as Pippi mentioned earlier, is impervious area, the hard surfaces, the things that you see on the screen there that are, if you can see the colors, they're delineated there in green for the rooftop, and then in blue for the driveways and sidewalks and other hard surfaces on the property. And the property lines are shown in red there on that screen capture. Now, at the end of the driveway, the red line there, between the red lines, that's the public transportation rights of way that the town is responsible for. And that's often where the stormwater management facilities are. So each property disposes of their stormwater from those colorful areas on your screen into the public right of way where the drainage system is, through the catch basins, into the pipes, and down to the lake ultimately. So charging people by their contribution to this town's stormwater management system is based on, with a user fee, impervious area. That has been found in many cases and tested in courts that it is a fair and equitable way for charging a user fee. It is in relation or in proportion to how much runoff volume and pollutant loading is contributed on a per property basis, rather than assessed value like with taxation or the width of your frontage or the zoning or the number of parking spaces, etc. And actually all of those things you see there in the second last bullet have all been used as the basis for a user fee. We're not talking about that. We're talking about considering impervious area as the basis for stormwater fee. Now the base charge is oftentimes, we take the annual budget, and Nancy's talked about the annual budget for Ajax's stormwater program, and we divide that by a suitable type of billing units system. And so, and that chart, so annual dollars divided by the billing units, and then we often split that up into bi-monthly bills or quarterly bills or something like that. That's the basic equation. Next slide. Okay, so narrowing down, these are the four options, specific options that we're going to look at in this study. The first is through the general tax funding, and you saw the numbers earlier that Nancy presented. If we were to pay for stormwater entirely on tax, that is to say, not accounting for funds, or sorry, grants and other things like that, everything is on tax, we'd have to double what we're paying because almost 50% of it right now is through grants and other external funds. If we put that all through tax, we'd have to double the tax rate. And then if the level of service increases 5 times, that's 10 times more through tax you'd have to pay. So you saw those numbers earlier. But that's what we're talking about, is raising property tax to pay for the increased cost of stormwater management. The other options are 3 of them that you see there are all user fees. So adopting a new user fee, the ERU, equivalent residential unit, that's where we apply the same fee for all residential properties per dwelling unit. If you have a single family detached home, that's 1 dwelling unit, 1 charge assessed to that property. If you've got an apartment building of 25 units, we split it up with the total fee, the total impervious area divided by those 25 units. Okay. So and so for the non-residential areas, the industrial, commercial, institutional, we wouldn't charge them by residential units because they don't have any. We charge based on their impervious area. So that's how it works. Now, the second bullet there, ERU, treats all the residential properties the same way. That's not fair sometimes. I mean, you can imagine the large properties that have big building footprints, and then compare them to the condo units and the higher density, they ought to be paying less. And that's what the single family unit SFU is meant to do. It's to charge a fixed rate on a single family detached home basis. So you compare yourself to all the other single family homes and charge according to that. Now, if your condo only has roughly 1/3 of the footprint of a single family home, you should only pay 1/3 of what a single family home pays for stormwater. So that's how it works. And then finally, the tiered SFU distinguishes between the single family homes that are large and those that are small, and comes up with different tiers, we call them size tiers. Next slide. Okay, so now that we've talked about the basis for a charge, well, the base charge, we apply it the same way throughout town. Now we can distinguish between individual properties that have the same building type, like a single family. How do you distinguish yourself from your neighbor beside you? Well, if you have facilities on your property that treat stormwater, not just the runoff, but the pollutant loading on your property before you dispose of it into the ditch out front, the pipe out front, the town's stormwater management system, if you do that, you're eligible for what's called a credit. So as part of a user fee, there almost always is a credit program these days, in Ontario at least, that goes along with that. And so these are financial incentives for people who reduce stormwater on their property. They get a discount on their monthly or bi-monthly or quarterly utility bill for stormwater. Now, in other communities, this has been capped at a maximum of 50%. That's quite common. And like I said, most municipalities that implement a user fee do have a credit program that goes with it. Next slide. Okay, now, so I'm jumping ahead to the last bullet, but it's a win-win situation. The way it's a win for the town is that now we have a way to ensure that these private property facilities that are treating stormwater on site, the town now has some sort of assurance that these things are being maintained. So the way it works is, if you want a credit for stormwater management on your property, you'd apply for a credit, and you would also, typically what's done is grant access to town staff to come and inspect at a time of your choice, to meet with them on your property and let them inspect if they want to, that these things are properly installed, operated, maintained, etc. And if that's the case, then you get a credit. Again, it is common for up to 50% credits on properties off their user fee. And so the whole goal behind that is to affect the actions, behaviors of private property owners so that it's more aligned with the town's stormwater management goals and objectives. That's something you cannot do right now with property tax. There's no discounts or things, property tax discounts, if you have stormwater management on your site. So we think that's a benefit all around. Next slide. Okay, so there's advantages. I've focused so far on the advantages of a stormwater user fee, dedicated stable funding, fair and equitable allocation. Everyone's charged using the same formula. And if you have a credit program that gives people incentives for treating stormwater on their site, the more you do on your property, the more you save. And it lets the town collect revenue from all properties that contribute stormwater to their stormwater collection system, stormwater management system, which is to say there are tax exempt properties in the town that don't contribute towards stormwater management. So this is a way of capturing those as well. There are disadvantages. So on the con side of this table here, it costs money to do this. So there's the rate study that we're talking about right now, the feasibility study, and of course the implementation study if council chooses to go down this road. There'd be a cost to that. There'd be a cost of setting up the initial database. There'd be a cost to maintaining that database and billing and customer service. There's also, and the asterisk there says, if we do this through existing billing systems, either through the electric or hydro utility, water, sewer, etc., there is a chance to greatly reduce some of those costs there that I mentioned. And finally, one disadvantage we see sometimes is the possibility that this isn't received by the public, you members of the public here in Ajax. Next slide. So we're reaching out to try and explain what this is and engage with you and get your feedback. So to address that last comment, we really want your feedback on this, your concerns, get them documented, and respond to them. So these are the stormwater user fees in Ontario. I note there we're past 40 now, coming up on 50 stormwater user fees in Canada. There's over 1,800 in the US, but let's zoom in on Ontario like the map does. And from Ottawa all the way down through London, St. Thomas, there's 16 stormwater user fees in Ontario. The range, as you can see there, is between $2 to $17 per month. Now, you can't really compare the $2 to the $17 because, well, the $17, like Kitchener and London, that is to fund all of the stormwater management programs within their city, within their jurisdiction. Whereas the Whitchurch Stouffville, which is the newest one in Ontario, and also Aurelia, they only charge $2, $3 a month just to fund a portion of their stormwater management program, not the entire thing. So there's quite a difference that explains that wide range that you see on the screen. Okay, next slide. Okay, I'll try not to spend too much time on this. I know I'm getting behind. We want to get to your questions. So what municipalities do when they're considering changing the way that stormwater is funded is to look at a broad range of categories or criteria at the different funding options. And so what you see on the screen is just a colorful way of doing that. We don't just look at one category, we need to consider many things. And so what you see on the screen, the color on the screen, if it's a favorable thing, it's green. If it's not favorable, disfavorable, against the option, it's in red. And then in between is the yellow. So the categories, just moving across, are, can you apply these funds that you see in the far left column, these different funding options, do they apply town-wide, right across the town? So for example, development charges, local improvements, those are only allowed, you can only collect money and spend money in very specific neighborhoods. So no, that's why there's a no there. The next column, does it meet entire revenue needs, is either a yes or a no. You can either use that funding source to pay for all things stormwater, or in the case of development charges, local improvements, etc., you can only use those funds for very specific things, not everything related to stormwater. The next thing is fair and equitable, which is to say, is this in proportion to the amount of runoff and pollution that's contributed to the town's system? And so we've got various degrees of responses there. Is it dedicated to stormwater? With the general fund, no, it's at council's discretion to spend tax money how they choose. That's their mandate for councillors, is to spend tax money according to the will of the town. And when stormwater is the biggest priority, yes, then stormwater will get the funding. When it's a lower priority, and it often is a lower priority, obviously, it would have less priority for spending. Well, that's not sustainable. That's not dedicated, like a dedicated tax levy or a user fee would be. And then the cost of administration kind of flips the other way. It can be costly to administrate a sophisticated user fee, whereas with the general tax fund, that's the status quo. So it doesn't cost anything additional to administrate that. And then there's other categories of accountability to the public with transparency and assigning cost centers to revenue collection items, et cetera. And then the environment gets the last category. So I need to go quickly here. So I'll skip to the next slide, and you'll have a copy of this presentation if you want it. Next slide. That just explains the questions that you asked to decide which color each of those boxes gets in the previous slide that I went very quickly through. So I'm going to turn it back to you. I think, Pippi, it goes back to you to wrap up here with the next steps.
It's Catherine. I'm going to take that one.
Right.
So Pippi, next slide, please. Thank you. And thanks, Mike, for explaining that. So there are 2 upcoming milestones in this study. So the first one is, we're working on it from now into winter 2021. And that milestone is the recommendation and funding strategy. In addition to the technical work in this phase, it will also include an internal steering committee meeting and a second virtual public meeting. And during those engagement sessions, they'll focus on describing how feedback from this first phase was considered and go deeper into the funding and revenue options and the preliminary evaluation of funding options. Mid-2021 is the implementation plan phase, and that will include a final report and presentation to the mayor and council. Next slide, please. So normally, we would conduct this type of thing in person, and we would be able to walk through the information and display panels with you. So we do really appreciate you joining us online. Before we get to the Q&A, we just want to reiterate that your input is valued and is an important part of this process. We have 2 main ways for you to stay involved and receive updates about the study. So we have a study web page. No need to write this down. We will be sharing the presentation slides afterwards. And in that web page, there's also an opportunity to subscribe to our mailing list. And you can also always contact Stephen Ruddy and Pippi Warburton if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. So before we get into the Q&A tonight, we'd also want to let you know that there is a survey, and it is related to the information that we presented this evening. It's on the study webpage. Please contact us if you need it in a different format for accessibility. And the survey will be open until about December 15th. So we do really appreciate your feedback and thoughts related to the information presented tonight. So I'm not sure if I don't see too many questions submitted. We do have a couple, so please, if you do have any questions, now is your opportunity to submit them. I think 1 or 2 people joined a little late, so just to remind you that the Q&A toolbar is in your menu, and if you just click on the Q&A box, you can enter your question that way. So we do have one question to start us off, and I think this will be for Stephen. So will waterfront properties that drain to the lake be treated differently?
Okay, thanks for the question. Right now we're looking at all options, and there certainly are stormwater management services that are provided to those properties that do discharge directly to the waterfront, but we are still early in the process and certainly nowhere close to implementation. So those are some of the questions we're still searching for the final answers for. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. Another question. If I live in a small bungalow, will I have to pay the same as a large mansion? And is that one, Stephen, would you like to take that one as well?
Yeah, sure, Catherine. So I think Mike really detailed this well, showing the tiered approaches are even more specific to the lot level analyses that are possible. So there isn't, necessarily a reason why you would pay the same if you had a small bungalow that as compared to a large mansion. But there are municipalities that do have flat rates for all residential. So in those instances, they would be paying the same. So we're still examining all of those options and how they affect different property types within the town. And we're searching for something that's kind of a combination of being fair and equitable, but at the same time, easily administered with not too much overhead. Hope that answers.
Also, I can add to that too. So in Ontario, the city of Guelph decided, where I'm calling from, decided to go with what we called earlier an ERU, equivalent residential. And that charges all residential properties the same, whether you're in a small condo, a small home versus a big, I hate to use the term, but McMansion, a larger residential property. However, with the city of Mississauga, Kitchener, others, they have decided that with high density, they need to distinguish lower cost for the higher density. And there's also, this could also be perceived as a beneficial thing. To encourage higher density residential development is a good thing to prevent against urban sprawl in some cases. So those types of arguments have won the argument. Those statements and things have won the argument for why a town or city should go with a user fee that favors the larger properties versus the smaller properties, or accounts for the differences between the two.
Thanks, Mike. We have a question that came in. I think Nancy could answer it. Do we know what administration costs other municipalities have reported?
Yeah, so the administration costs do depend on which option you select and whether you offer a credit rebate program. There are some setup costs. Once the program is up and running and you have sort of, let's say, worked out all the kinks, then other municipalities in Ontario have reported, a fairly minimal cost. It might be part of part of one person's time to update. And once you get the systems in place, such that once a site gets developed, the information automatically goes into the billing system. So once those processes are in place, it's not a huge cost. But again, it does depend on the extent of your credit or rebate program. And I'm also going to let probably Mike or Pippi talk a little more about this too.
Yeah, so I was just going to add to that from other municipalities we work with, somewhere between half a full-time person and a full-time person to run the cost of the administration of it, depending how complicated the program is, for sure. So similar to what Nancy was saying. So if you have just a single tier and not a lot of development in the area, not a lot of new applications for changes, then it's pretty straightforward. So half a full-time person is more than enough to manage the program. Yeah, and so in the first year, of course, it takes a lot of more effort in the administration cost to get the program set up and running. But once it's running, somewhere between half a full-time person and a full-time person. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
We have another question. Under the system you mentioned, how long would it take to pay back the cost of installing a rain garden, for example, through the rebate? And it's asked to see whether the rebate program actually incentivizes people to install green infrastructure. Mike, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, this is a very good question, and you might not like the answer. it's hard to please everyone with respect to this. But so let me give you examples of what other communities are doing and the types of decisions that have been made in other communities. So in Southern Ontario, at least, like I mentioned, up to 50% credits are awarded if you've got the right rain garden or other thing like that installed on your property. Now, if you think about it, if everyone claimed a 10% rebate for a rain barrel, let's say, and everyone was given a 10% credit or whatever for a rain barrel, you're giving revenue away. So you'd have to increase the cost to everyone else. So there is a fine line when you're setting a rate to, the danger is if you have a very high uptake level, if everyone claims a credit, you've got to increase the rate to make up for that lost or that unrecognized revenue. Actually, what's happening for the communities that have given credits to residential rain gardens and barrels and things like that, the uptake is lower than expected. And they're finding it's not worth the effort to spend staff time in approving these, inspecting them. So I'm sorry I don't have a very satisfying answer, but the financial incentive for installing green infrastructure just because you get a credit on your user fee is not very high. It doesn't incentivize you. There are better reasons for doing it. It's because you're doing your fair share or things like that. Now, all the comments I just made apply to residential properties. For the non-residential properties, the big shopping malls and big industries that do have stormwater management on site, they can make a big difference, and they are worth incentivizing, and they can demonstrate a payback period on some of their facilities. So it does make financial business sense, I suppose, to install a facility on their property to claim a credit. So that's a long answer, and I wish I was more positive, but I'm not.
And I think, Mike, to follow up on that, because when we looked at the numbers, so if the average home pays $150, well, it's going to take a lot of 50% offs to, install something significant. But as you mentioned, if you've got a large development that's all of a sudden paying $500, $5,000, then all of a sudden a 50% savings does result in incentive to install these systems. But the big thing about, and this is more of a credit program, there are two ways of attacking this. Is you get a credit program, which is what we are describing, where you get 50% off your rate, and then there's a pure rebate program where the government says, okay, you build a program, here's your money back, here's your 50% back, and that can be done separately, where the town can say, regardless, even if your fee is only $150, we are going to give you up to $500 to install a rain garden. And that's more of a potentially a rebate program, and it might even be over a certain number of years, but that's slightly different. The other thing that's really important about a credit program is that once something is put on property, you want them to maintain it and you want it to keep working and what the credit program can do is that in order for someone to continue to get their credit each year, I've got a pond, I've got a rain garden, is you have to show that you've maintained it. So they do a lot of this with oil grit separators and other underground units, where you actually have to produce and show that you're maintaining the system and that it's still operating and still working. And that's a really valuable part about the credit program.
Thanks, Nancy. So it looks like we just have one more question. So a reminder to everyone on the call tonight, if you do have questions, please submit them through the Q&A. It's your chance to get them answered live tonight. So this question, does this mean my property taxes would go down if the town adopts a user fee? And Mike?
Okay, I can tackle that one. So there's actually, for municipalities in Ontario that have decided to go for a stormwater user fee, this is a very common question. And I wish I, again, had a more positive response. It is almost always staff recommendations that if you're taking this funding source off of property tax, say the town goes with $9 million. So well, right now it's $2 million. If we take $2 million off of property tax and move it on to a user fee, that would leave a $2 million void in the property tax base. And so other municipalities in Ontario have said, we can try, it's our desire to keep that 2 million deficit or whatever's been taken off intact for a whole year, just to show that you did have a reduction in your property tax. That rarely happens in case, because there's always some other council need that would need that can fill up that $2 million void that's now in the property tax base. So theoretically, yes, you can see a property tax decrease if you move that $2 million onto a user fee. So that $2 million would be paid through a user fee, and your property taxes overall would be $2 million less. That rarely happens in practice. It's a nice thought, but it rarely happens.
Okay, thanks, Mike. It doesn't look like we have any other questions, so we might give it a couple of moments. If you might be typing something or if something's just come to you, we'll keep that open for a little bit longer. And while we wait, is there anything else that any of the panelists would like to say that they didn't get a chance to tonight?
Yeah, I would just say, thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks Catherine for helping us host this call, and Stephen for joining us from the town. And just to reiterate what Catherine and Stephen were saying, that please feel free to reach out to myself or Stephen by phone or email if you have any questions or comments, or you just want some more information. Like everyone's been saying, we do genuinely want to hear from you. Although the study team has done a lot of these studies around Ontario, we've definitely learned that every municipality is different and unique. And that's why we really definitely want to hear from you how we can best approach this to make sure that your assets are being monitored and maintained in a responsible way, but also in an affordable and mindful way of what's the balance of things. So thanks everybody again, and I'll turn it back over to you, Catherine, for your final sign off here. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Pippi. So thank you everyone very much for attending this evening. We really do appreciate the time you've taken to learn about the study, and we do value your input. We encourage you to visit the study webpage at imo.ajax.ca/stormwater to review the materials in more detail and provide your direct input in the survey. We will send you a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the materials when they are posted. So thank you again, and we'll close the meeting and have a good night.